Let's speak now to Livia Paggi. She's partner and head of political strategy at GPW Political Risk. Livia, very good morning to you.
Good morning.
I mean, what essentially does Russia want out of this?
So the main issue, Russia is concerned that there's an increasingly sophisticated Western-aligned military presence in Ukraine, its most important Western border state. And the West is worried that Russia is taking advantage of its recent non-interventionist foreign policy, as exemplified in what we just saw in Afghanistan, to reassert its geopolitical influence. And there's little immediate scope for compromise, so we really need to watch how this will now play out.
I mean, I've seen it suggested that basically Ukraine is becoming more Western in its outlook. It's edging towards, it's been a Western-style democracy at recent points in its history. Mr. Putin doesn't like that sort of successful democratic model on his doorstep.
I mean, the main point is that Russia is losing its influence in a lot of the border states nearby. We've seen social unrest across many of the former Soviet states, most recently in Kazakhstan, and Russia is very wary of losing this influence and is particularly wary of having a built-up military that's backed by the US and by the EU right on its border.
Now, your base case is that a sustained military campaign against Ukraine is unlikely. That's quite optimistic. Why do you hold that view?
The fact is that neither party wants full-on conflict, right? But neither party also wants to back down. There's no way that NATO will permanently preclude Russian border states from joining, and there's little possibility of Russia unilaterally demilitarizing anything without having achieved anything. But the most likely scenario, what we're really going to see is that Russia ups the ante to seek alternative concessions. We're going to probably see a lot of quasi-warfare with Russia testing the boundaries, cyber attacks, incursions in NATO airspace. And this is a really well-known Russian state negotiation tactic. And the fact is that Russia knows that the US doesn't want outright war and is also very nervous to implement sanctions. There's no real sanctions left that can have meaningful impact without damaging Western interests. And Russia's really going to play up on this, and we'll see what happens next.
I mean, one thing that the West could do is try and bar Russia from SWIFT, the international payment system. Why is that proving so difficult to do?
I mean, the fact is that it also really hurts Western interests by barring Russia from, SWIFT payments, right? So the oil and gas prices can go up from something like that. And really the main issue, what's happening with sanctions is also that the EU and the US are not aligned on how severe this package needs to actually be. The EU imports a lot of its gas from Russia and is wary about implementing strict sanctions, where the US has much less at stake.
Well, absolutely. I mean, one key development, of course, is Nord Stream 2, which is the gas pipeline that's being built to ostensibly to supply Germany with Russian gas. I mean, that's not been completed yet. Is it possible that that might be suspended? Would that put the screws on Russia?
I mean, this is the main issue right now that's going back and forth behind the scenes. Europe very much, Germany especially, which imports approximately about 30% of its gas from Russia, is pushing very much to have Nord Stream built, whereas the US, which now is a major exporter of oil and gas, simply does not have as much at stake. We're going to see a lot more negotiations whether this is likely to go ahead or not. At the moment, there are some talks that it will be halted.
What's really interesting, though, is that Germany's new coalition government, and particularly its foreign minister, who's the leader of the German Green Party, she is far more hawkish towards Russia than Angela Merkel ever was.
I mean, that's right. There's a new coalition, so there's quite a lot of division within Germany at the moment. But at the end of the day, it's the German consumer that's going to have to be paying for an potential increase in gas price. And that's going to be essential for German political stability to ensure that the gas continues to flow at a reasonable price.
I mean, Livia, there's an old saying, patriotism is the last refuge of the scoundrel. How is all this playing with the Russian public?
When you look at Russian polls, actually, Putin has very high approval ratings for his geopolitical strategy. Whereas if you look at his approval ratings for how he's running the economy, they're much lower. So actually, there is quite a lot of support for how Putin has managed geopolitics over the past few years. There's been quite a lot of approval for his presence in growing presence in the Middle East, his position on the Ukraine, and also we've seen Russian, some small military presence also in Africa. And this is greatly supported by the Russian population.
All right, Livia, we have to leave it there. Good to see you again this morning. Thanks very much indeed for joining me.